Rape and sexual assault. It's considered one of the most underreported crimes in the United States. And the statistics for such a heinous underreported crime are alarming. According to the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network located in Washington, D.C., the nation's largest anti-sexual violence organization, 44% of rape and sexual assault victims are under the age of 18. 80% of victims are under the age of 30. Every 2 minutes, someone in the United States is being sexually assaulted, meaning if we look at the local time, it is 5:12 p.m. That means at 5:14 p.m., someone else, somewhere, right here in America, has just been raped or sexually assaulted. Each year, there are over 207,000 victims of sexual assault, and approximately 2/3 of those assaults are committed by someone known to the victim. 38% of rapists are a friend or an acquaintance of the victim. And finally, 54% of those assaults are never reported to the police. And 97% of rapists will never spend a single day behind bars. Yes, all of those statistics are true, and they may not be getting better. And that's where our panel of professionals come in to help us find out why and if there are any solutions to bringing these numbers down. Here to help us discuss this, we have Susan Shipman, who is the Executive Director of Second Chance Domestic and Sexual Violence Shelter of Anniston, Trace-Fleming Smith, who is the Sexual Assault Victims Advocate for Second Chance Domestic and Sexual Violence Shelter of Anniston, Sergeant Carl Pruinger, who is the lead investigator for the Jacksonville State University Police Department, Brian McVeigh, who is the District Attorney for Calhoun County, and Jennifer Gillespie Weems, who is the Calhoun County Assistant District Attorney. We want to thank them so much for being here. I want to start off with you, Trace-Fleming Smith. Trace-Fleming Smith is the Sexual Assault Victims Advocate for Second Chance Domestic and Sexual Violence Shelter of Anniston. You heard these statistics and you heard these numbers, and as I said in the introduction, they are just extremely alarming. What is it that people can do to help lower these numbers?
Thank you so much for having us on the program. I really appreciate that. I also really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this, because part of the issue that surrounds sexual violence is a culture of silence. And the numbers that you talked about are astounding, and they're appalling, and they're horrendous in the way that the fact that we aren't talking about this nearly enough. We have so many people being affected by this on a daily basis that you would think that we would be so angry by this, we would have a different culture about it. But it's almost so often it's something we like to push off onto other people, on that, well, that doesn't happen here. That's not something that affects me. That's not my problem. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why we continue to have these high numbers, is because we're not looking at it as a community problem or as an individual problem. We're looking at it as somebody else's problem.
I want to switch over here to Ms. Susan Shipman, who is the Executive Director of the Second Chance Sexual and Domestic Violence Shelter in Anniston. Why don't people who have been victims of these crimes report them? Many people say that reporting it can only help you and that it won't hurt you, but many don't agree with that.
Well, I have to say, if I'm thinking about if I put myself in that position, would I report? There are a lot of different reasons, just as individual as the victims, why the sexual assault, the rape is not reported. And, a lot of victims blame themselves for the rape. It's never her fault. It's not because her skirt was too short, or her shirt was too tight, or because she got drunk, or it's the rapist. The rapists can stop raping, and then the numbers come down. Really do have to put yourself in the victim's position to figure out whether you would actually report yourself. It's a very individual issue.
And why do you think that, what psychology comes into play when the victim decides, maybe this was my fault, maybe I should not have done this? Where does that psychology come into play, do you think?
Well, there's a lot of societal norms that I think come into play that we are not holding rapists accountable because we as society are affixing the blame on the victim. Why would I want to report when you're going to say that it was my fault that this happened? Victims don't have a victim handbook to tell them these are the steps you need to go through to do a good job of reporting. You need to immediately go to the emergency room, and you need to have a rape kit done, and you need to let them have your clothing, and you need to make sure that the police report goes in immediately, and you need to be prepared for the prosecution. And it's a very complicated issue, and it's a very personal issue.
I want to shift the focus now here, and let's go to the legal aspects regarding rape and sexual assault. I want to now turn it over to Jennifer Gillespie-Weems, who is the Assistant District Attorney for Calhoun County. Can you just tell our listeners out there, what are some of the criminal consequences if someone is convicted of crimes such as rape, sodomy, or sexual assault in the state of Alabama?
Okay. Well, there's three primary charges that we bring. We bring sodomy charges, which in the state of Alabama relates to deviant sexual intercourse, which is your oral and anal intercourse. Rape charges are related to vaginal sexual intercourse, and then sexual abuse charges are related to sexual contact. For rape and sodomy in the first degree, that's going to be sex by force, or sex with a child less than 12, or sex with someone who is physically helpless, meaning they're unconscious, or mentally incapacitated, meaning that they have been given a subtype of drug that makes them unconscious. The punishment range for rape and sodomy in the first degree is going to be 10 to 99 years to life. For rape and sodomy in the second degree, that's going to be your statutory consensual cases with defendants over the age of 16 and victims between the age of 12 and 16. It's also going to include sex with someone who's not able to consent because they don't have the ability to apprise their conduct. The sentencing range on those is going to be 2 to 20 years. And then sexual abuse charges in the first degree is going to be sexual contact by force, and sex abuse second is going to be statutory sexual contact with someone under 16, over 12, with a defendant who's over 19. That's going to be misdemeanor class A on the sexual abuse in the second. That's 365 days. On sexual abuse first degree, that's going to be a class C felony, which is 1 to 10 years. And all of these charges that I've talked about require registration as a sex offender, which in Alabama is about a 98-page document of rules and regulations for these offenders to live by, to follow. If they don't, it's an additional felony on their record, and they could spend more prison time. And in most of these charges, parole is not an option, particularly for children less than 12. And in the violent sexual cases, then they're looking at 85% of their sentence.
And all of these crimes require them to be a registered sex offender for the rest of their life?
Yes. All of these crimes that I just discussed require them to be sex offenders for the rest of their life. They'll check in with the sheriff's office once every 3 months. Flyers will go out with their pictures on it. They will not be allowed to work or live within 2,000 feet of daycare centers, schools, or places that are for the primary purpose of entertaining children. And it's pretty significant restrictions.
I want to bring Brian McVeigh into this. Brian McVeigh is the district attorney for Calhoun County. I know obviously you were not able to comment specifically on this particular story involving the Jacksonville State University SGA president, but Jade has decided not to press charges against the man who she says raped her. And for many reasons, people don't want to charge these crimes because they feel that they won't get a fair trial. No one will believe them, or there's no evidence. And some just don't want the embarrassment or the pain of having to relive their torture in a public trial. And as a prosecutor, do you face these difficulties prosecuting sex crimes?
Yes, and I'll talk about adult crimes as well as juvenile crimes in the same sentence. These are not easy cases to discuss. The subject matter is difficult. But that does not mean we cannot be successful in prosecuting these cases. Ms. Weems has done an incredible job, especially lately with some prosecution. But I would guard you to say you don't want to encourage people not to come forward. As a matter of fact, without talking specifically about this case, I think if any good comes of your article that you wrote, it should be that we inform people better about what's available to them. Ultimately, the decision to prosecute almost any sex case is going to be up to the victim and the victim's family. But that does not mean you can't come forward and talk to us and understand your rights and have a sexual abuse and assault prosecutor explain to you what could happen in a case and talk to you about your case. You may think that your case is poor in quality or evidence, and we may have a different opinion. In addition to that, there are counseling services available. Second Chance, Ms. Shipman and Ms. Fleming Smith have been kind enough to work with us. We're doing some training together. The Children's Center does a great job with children. Counseling is something, whether you ever prosecute your case or not, that you could benefit from. So my encouragement here today is for people to come forward. Obviously, in an ideal situation, yes, every prosecutor would like you to go immediately to law enforcement and medical personnel. We'd like every stitch of evidence that we could get, DNA and otherwise, but we don't live in an ideal world. So there are a lot of times where people go home and take a shower or think about it overnight, and they don't want to tell and ultimately decide to. Those cases are still prosecutable in many instances. So come forward would be my request. Learn your rights, and then even if you choose not to prosecute, you still could benefit from talking to people who could get you help and counseling so that you can heal to some degree and move forward.
At what point is it no longer a victim's right to say yes or no? At one point, are the police officers able to bring charges on their own?
Well, that's a good question, and in every case is different. I would say generally, if we're talking about a domestic violence situation, where somebody has been beaten or abused and maybe there's a component of domestic violence and sexual assault, there are instances where we have to step in and defend somebody against themselves. But that's not really what I'm talking about here today. I'm talking about purely on a basis of rape cases or sexual assault. I don't want people to believe that they have two options: one, silence, and two, prosecution, because that's not correct. The vast majority of the time, if you have been a victim of sexual assault or rape, you can choose to prosecute if the evidence is there, but you could at least talk to us. And if you come talk to us, you are not controlled by us. We're not going to tell you to go forward if that's not what you want to do. But I would encourage people to come get help because counseling does play a significant role in getting people to a better place. And there are folks who come in who don't want to prosecute at first, and then after getting some counseling and determining that they're not the bad guy, they then at times decide that maybe they would like to prosecute. As many of those sex offenders that we can identify and prosecute successfully and have identified on the sheriff's website and marked as a sex offender for the rest of your life, the better protection we have for other victims in the future. But that does not mean that if you're a victim and you don't come forward and want to prosecute that you have victimized somebody else. It means we want to know as much as we can know. We want to give you your rights, and we really would like to have people get to that better place so they can make decisions based on what's best for them. Again, you're talking about completely different issues with children. There are some situations at the Children's Center where we may make a decision to prosecute on a child's case because it's in their best interest, and maybe their family are the people that have been abusing them. But generally with adults, they're going to be able to make that decision whether they want to move forward or not.
I want to also just in regards to this, because obviously